Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another live stream. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. We have an incredible show for you today. Make sure you hit that like button as you come on. The BRICS Summit 2025 in Rio just happened, and it's sending shockwaves across the world order. At no other point in the history of the U.S.'s dollar dominance has it been challenged by such a fierce rising alternative. And this year's BRICS Summit only underscored this reality. As Trump issued threats of tariffs to BRICS members and their associates, BRICS was discussing an alternative payment system via its new development bank, or the BRICS Bank. As Trump was reportedly greenlighting future attacks on Iran alongside Benjamin Netanyahu, BRICS was condemning Israeli and U.S. aggression against Iran during the 12-day war. And as Trump promised more weapons to Ukraine, BRICS condemned Ukraine's attack on Russia. To help us understand the significance of BRICS during this summit, de-dollarization, and so much more, we have three very special guests. We have first time on the show, market analyst Sean Foo. He runs an incredible and hosts an incredible YouTube channel, which you can find in the video description after the show. Sean, good to see you.
Hey, great to be here, Danny.
It's amazing to have you. We also have first time on this show, host of the ThinkBRICS YouTube channel. We have Anastasia Galiakova. Thanks for being here, Anastasia. It's great to see you.
Thank you for an invitation.
Of course. And then we have returning guest, senior fellow at the Tahi Institute and China expert, Mr. Dr. Warwick Powell. Warwick, great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you all.
Yeah, we have a lot to get to, everyone. So how about we get started with this year's summit? So as BRICS was meeting in Rio, of course, and Sean, we can start with you because I know you've been covering this quite closely. We had Donald Trump. He issued an ultimatum to BRICS and their associates. He said any country aligning themselves with anti-American policies of BRICS will be charged an additional 10% tariff. There'll be no exceptions to this policy. Thanks for your attention to this matter. Of course, a lot was happening at the BRICS Summit. Sean, talk about your reactions not only to this ultimatum, but I've heard you say on your program many times that de-dollarization, this drive toward a growing BRICS multipolar world system, is about much more than de-dollarization. So talk about with the significance of not just Trump's ultimatum, but the answer to it worldwide.
Sure. I think we need to see de-dollarization as a sort of symptom of the American problem, right? Now, the issue with Trump's ultimatum is that it is, at the end of the day, it's going to be very self-defeating. The problem with his ultimatum is telling the world that, all right, if you follow BRICS anti-American policies, we'll slap an additional 10% tariff on you. But this opens up a whole can of worms. What does he really mean when it comes to anti-American policies, right? Does it mean trading with China? Does it mean trading with Russia, buying Russian oil? Or does it just mean trading with BRICS as a whole? And this really opens up a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty with trading partners all over the world. I mentioned before, for example, if Europe decides to trade with China, and they bypass the dollar and they use either euros or Chinese yuan in their transactions, does this also mean it's a kind of anti-American policy? And if you want to slap countries with an additional 10% tariff on it, you're going to essentially blow up world trade. Now, just imagine if you're a country and then you're facing an additional 10% barrier on top of whatever you need to pay, right? Maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 30%, now it's 40%. What are the chances of your goods actually making it to the American market at the end of the day? It's going to be slim to none, and Slim has just left the building. And if we look at the growing the growing economies that's really going to power up over the next 10 to 20 years, it's going to be the BRICS. And that means a lot of trade flows will eventually flow towards the bloc and not towards the US. And this is bad on so many factors for the US economy, right? It actually accelerates the dollarization. A lot of money will not eventually flow back to American markets. And Trump is just going to accelerate his biggest fear.
Yeah, great points. And Anastasia, Dmitry Medvedev, second in command in Russia, he said this. He said, BRICS is gaining authority. Trump's announced an additional 10% tariff would be imposed on any country that supports BRICS' policy. So we're doing everything right. Anastasia, talk about your reaction to what occurred at the BRICS Summit. There was, some maybe pessimism about it in the beginning, but it seems that it ended with some optimism. So talk about your reaction to this and the developments that surrounded the summit.
First, I would like to say that Trump posts so frequently on his social media, so it's not first time that he tries to frighten BRICS. So you remember that he actually, in anger, he was telling that 100% tariffs will be imposed on BRICS nations and so on. So I think a lot of people got used to that fact that Trump is talking, and sometimes one day one thing, another day is the opposite. So in my opinion, 10% tariff, again, that narrative that to scare BRICS countries, the partner belt and so on. President Lula responded that, I think, very clear. And he was very clear about that, talking that we do not need an emperor here. We are sovereign countries. So we may translate that, who cares about that 10% or what Trump says? Then about your question, the expectations, actually from the very beginning, just a few weeks away, when it became public that President Putin will not go and President Xi Jinping will not be present, I read a lot of articles and a lot of opinions that all the two leaders of that power, Putin and Xi Jinping, are not at the summit, and it may weaken the summit, the picture of the summit itself. But may I read one comment our subscriber left? And after reading that comment, I rethought my idea. Wait a second. Interesting shift in BRICS. Xi Jinping is skipping the summit for the first time in 12 years. China says it's a scheduling conflict, but many see it as a sign that China's taking a more selective approach to global leadership. Meanwhile, India and Brazil are stepping up, and BRICS continues expanding with Indonesia now a full member. This could be China subtly recalibrating its role while letting other nations take the spotlight for now. Things are definitely changing on the global stage. After reading that comment, I realized that might be a point. And we have seen during the summit that President Lula and Indian Prime Minister, they took the spotlight. So that might be, I don't know, not a scheduled approach, but it definitely may happen. I don't know what our colleagues from China may say about that.
Yeah, Dr. Powell, what's your reaction to this? Because there was talk, of course, there have been criticisms even of the New Development Bank, for example, not being able to kind of being under the stranglehold still of the dollar. But there were big discussions about creating an alternative to SWIFT, a proposal. And we know that Russia's finance minister was a big part of that, Mr. Sulianov. But talk about your reaction to the happenings of the summit and maybe anything you want to react to with what others said.
Yeah, look, I think in the lead up to the summit, a lot of people bring to the table a lot of emotional investment and hope. And in many regards, particularly as we live in a social media age, we're looking for instant fixes. This tends not to be how global systems work. They tend to grind away with their own temporalities and their own rhythms, and often we feel as individuals that events move very, very slowly. And in some regards, I think many people who hope for change in the world are just desperately wanting there to be a big bang event that that ushers in the change. This particular BRICS summit, I think, did mark an important episode in this unfolding processes of multi-polarity development, not just because of some personnel issues, which of course can animate people quite a lot, but more because it really, I think, put a stake in the ground that countries were not going to be bullied, that they were going to continue focusing on the things that mattered to them from an economic development and peaceful prosperity point of view, and that they would continue to find pathways to collaborate with each other and progress the interests of the global south. And I think that that's probably the most important thing to remember. Let's not forget it was only 3.5, 4 months ago when the 100% and then 150% tariff threats were leveled at BRICS. And clearly that was not enough to dissuade countries from being involved, because people, frankly, are a little bit tired of where things are at, and they want to progress reform in the world in ways that create space for developing countries to, one, have more say in how the world works, and secondly, also to ensure that they are able to benefit from the opportunities of economic and social development that have been denied to them for many decades. So I tend to sort of be neither optimistic nor pessimistic, I guess, when I look at events like this, but really try to contextualize them in these long processes of systemic transformation. The last Trump missive in his social media tweet about the 10% stuff, as Sean mentioned, creates a lot of confusion, of course, because talk of things like aligning with and, you know, well, what does any of that sort of stuff mean? But that notwithstanding, I think it sends a very powerful message, and that is that the fundamental raison d'etre of BRICS, which is to ensure developing countries can unify and deal with global bullies, has been reaffirmed. This is precisely why institutions like BRICS emerged and why they continue to grow. And the more that the United States and President Trump persists with this kind of communications and bullying tactics, I think the more strength the global south will get. You know, in fact, from a PR point of view, I don't think they could ask for anything better than that particular tweet.
Well, yeah, Sean, back.
I just wanted to add, despite that text, that message that Trump left on his social media, I do not think that many countries got scared of that. Look at Malaysia, what their minister told today after the BRICS summit, that it's a golden chance for the country and they are not going to lose it.
Now, look,
even with tariffs, without tariffs, or that they just want to follow that way that was decided during the BRICS summit. And they saw the opportunity BRICS might give to Malaysia, for example, if we take this example.
Yeah, well, Sean, back to you. You know, I mean, Anastasia, I think gives a good kicking off point to, you know, you've been covering tariffs quite deeply. As the BRICS summit was happening, Trump was rolling out, you know, this 90-day pause or whatever it was seems to have completely ended, and now tariffs are flying. So, Sean, this seems to be the weapon of choice for the U.S., the Trump administration in particular, against BRICS and the rising BRICS countries, particularly China. But now it seems like it's the entirety of the global south. Your analysis of what the actual effect of this is. You've been covering this quite deeply. I want to know your thoughts.
Sure. No, I think that terrorists are ultimately self-defeating in a very, very disastrous way. Now, if we think back on the first weapon used by Washington back during the Biden administration, it was the confiscation of Russian assets, right? Now, that sent a shockwave throughout the whole world. It just showed that America's overreach is really astounding. It can go and confiscate the reserves of a sovereign country when it comes to treasury bonds and any other assets out there. Now, the problem with the tariffs versus the confiscation is that a confiscation, the Americans can always argue it away, right? We are only going to do it to our enemies, whether it is Iran, whether it's Russia, or whether it's maybe China in the future, who knows? But the problem with the tariffs is that it's universal. It affects every single country out there. And let's remember that the baseline tariff is around 10%, could be even more, right? If no one responds to the letters sent by Scott Bessent. Now, the problem with this is that when you impose a 10% tariff or more to the world, it actually makes it much harder to export to the US. So right now, countries, they have a very big choice to make, right? Let's say they really want to sell to the Americans, sell to the American market. Somehow, they need to bring down their cost of production. So let's say XYZ country or Penguin Island, for example, gets hit with a 20% or 30% tariff. Now, in order to sell your products all the way to the Americans, you need to lower down your cost of production by maybe 20 or 30%, right? And how are you going to do that? Now, the only countries in the world that can really give you those kind of industrial inputs are countries in the BRICS. Not just Russia, not just Indonesia. The linchpin that we all should be looking at is China. Now, it's quite interesting that if we look at Chinese exports over the last 3 months, I think once the reciprocal tariff started in April, instead of it actually going down, it went up in aggregate. So yes, Chinese exports to the US fell by 20, 30 or 40%. No one's really denying that. But if you look at the exports to the rest of the world, it's growing by 20, 30, 40% in some cases to all these countries, right? We just need to look at Europe. Now, Europe, they are buying more from China, right? The Europeans like to say that, Chinese this, Chinese that, we don't like the Chinese, they're going to destroy our industries. But at the end of the day, they still need to buy cheap Chinese inputs and from the rest of the countries as well, whether it's Malaysia, Indonesia, the rest of BRICS. And because of that, the Americans has really sandwiched themselves in a very unviable position. It's not good. So the rest of the world right now, as a result of Trump's tariffs, they are forced to trade more with BRICS, right? Whether they like it or not, they need to lower their cost of production. So what happens now is Trump has actually accelerated de-dollarization like never before. So countries, a lot of exporters and importers, they're talking with each other right now. So a Chinese exporter can go to, let's say, an importer in Rome and can say that, all right, let's say we just transact in bilateral currencies, you pay in yuan, and we'll give you a 2-3% discount, right? And in this era where margins are so razor thin, 2 to 3% is enough to either help you make a profit or you can just crash everything. So in this sense, it really kickstart the entire flywheel, entire cycle of countries just abandoning the dollar, not because they hate the dollar. Maybe they just want a discount, or whether they just pissed off at the US, it doesn't really matter. Trump essentially has started his own nightmare with his entire tariff war. And I think he's not going to like the end results of what's going to happen down the next 5, 10, or 20 years.
Yeah. And Anastasia, perhaps you can talk about, in response to what Sean just said, Russia's finance minister played a particularly big role at the BRICS Summit, Anton Silyanov, and he made a lot of comments to the media. This is one thing he said in response to a question about the use of national currencies in BRICS trade. He said, quote, "Such settlements have proven their reliability and independence from Western lending institutions that at any moment, as it turns out, can suspend payments." So, Anastasia, talk about the role in particular that Russia played at this BRICS summit, as well as in this larger drive toward de-dollarization. Oh, I'm sorry, you're muted. Gotcha.
Yeah. Anton Silyanov, as a finance minister, of course, participated in the BRICS summit, and he continued the way that was paved during the Kazan summit last year, when we heard first time that the new payment system should be implemented in BRICS. And of course, during this year, there were a lot of speculations about some, news that it will be a common currency among BRICS. There won't be, and etc. But the main thing the minister wanted to say, and he told that the local currencies play enormous role in trade. And he told that, for example, Russia and China, they're trading in national currencies. And he told that also that national currencies exchange, it's not only for Russia important, it's important for all BRICS nations. If we take an example of Brazil and China, it's the same. If we take Iran and China, it's the same. They're trading in yuan and Iranian currency. So in Russia, this topic of rubles exchange and yuan exchange, it's very relevant. So they talk about it quite often. And I think in few, I don't know, months maybe, we will see new BRICS payment system ready for use. I think I have this feeling. Everything will be dependent on how central banks of BRICS countries and financial ministers will work together.
Yeah, and Dr. Powell, 90% of trade between BRICS countries already is done in their local national currencies. So if you could talk about the significance of this, because the Western mainstream media was downplaying the significance of this summit for a very particular reason. But even Bloomberg had to say, well, you can't really ignore BRICS anymore. Talk about why that is.
Well, they've been trying to ignore BRICS now for well over a decade, much to their own loss, really. The global economic system has been evolving quite significantly now for the best part of the last 3 decades, to a point where the center of gravity has quite clearly shifted away from the transatlantic economies, and particularly the United States as its pivot point. These days, the US market provides about 14% or a little bit less of total global imports, which is a significant reduction from where it was even 25 years ago. And the point of mentioning that is simply to demonstrate that the contours of global commerce and value flows continue to shift, and that the US is no longer in a position to unilaterally dictate terms. And this ultimately underpins why there is an evolution away from the use of the United States dollar as the principal trade settlement currency. The evolution of the payment system will, in a sense, go along with the ongoing changes to the structure of global production distribution and the complementarities between different economies that engage in trade with each other. One of the interesting issues that emerges when you're dealing with bilateral trade is, in the event that there are imbalances between 2 trading parties, it can create ultimately liquidity problems in relation to settlements with national currencies. But these liquidity challenges are progressively overcome through a number of mechanisms. One is bilateral swap agreements. The other one, of course, is simply by expanding the network of trading partners so that there is a greater number of trading pairs that enables enterprises in different countries to buy and sell their goods with each other, and ultimately deliver, I guess, a trading ecosystem in which there is sufficient liquidity to settle accounts at the end of each day. The interesting thing about payment systems is that they really are mechanisms by which central banks of participating countries make ledger adjustments each day. So what gets added on one gets minus from another, and information needs to pass amongst central banks that will enable that to happen, and for those ledgers to be updated and maintained with a level of confidence amongst the participating parties that the updates are taking place and that the updates are accurate and are reflective of the situation across the whole network. So, look, this particular BRICS summit is significant because it simply consolidates all of that. It demonstrates that the global South nations are not going to be bullied, that they see mutual benefits in pursuing trade. They understand that there is safety and security in collaboration and in numbers, and that there is a lot of risk in not creating these sorts of institutions that can protect them from the capricious reach of the United States political arm. So I think that that's where we're at. I mean, these are just sort of reflective of long-term structural changes. People get obsessed with trade. Trade's really a consequence of production systems and the allocation or the distribution of that globally. And we're seeing that continue to evolve over time as developing countries enhance their own capabilities with infrastructure, with energy systems, and ultimately with access to raw materials, of which the BRICS nations have abundant supplies of. So look, that's where I think the significance is that this is really the return of the real economy, right? Over financialization and understanding that value ultimately is use value underpinned by the ability of enterprises to transform energy and material properties within national economies.
Yeah, and well, Sean, maybe we can get into some of the intricacies of the de-dollarization process and the impact of this trend. You talk a lot about how especially U.S. policy, U.S. economic policy, U.S. economic war, really on China and the rest of the emerging BRICS multipolar world. How that is fueling de-dollarization. But there are a lot of doubters, Sean, a lot of people still, despite the data, I think the latest data is that the dollar is really in a one of the worst positions over the last 6 months that it's been in a long time. But maybe you can explain why this development is significant and how the U.S. As this financial hegemon is building the blocks toward de-dollarization.
Sure. I think we need to take a time machine back to the Bretton Woods system, right? Where the entire dollar system was predicated on one simple rule, where the US will finance the entire world with dollars. They will flood the entire world with currency. And the rest of the world, due to convenience and the US being the superpower, especially after World War II, they would just send their staff all the way to the US in exchange for dollars. But if we look at what is happening over the last 10, 20 years, the amount of US assets, especially when it comes to treasury bonds, as the percentage of what central banks are holding has been going down. It has fallen from, I think, around 40%, maybe down to just 20 or 25% of their total reserves. Well, a big reason why is the US mismanaging the entire currency. They have a big debt pile and the deficit spending is out of control. But Trump, due to his tariff war, he has just thrown gasoline onto the fire. And let's just think about it. When you impose more or less a 20% effective tariff rate on the world, you're going to slow down global trade with the US by maybe 10, 20%, maybe 5%. Or it just means that the flow of dollars going out to the world is going to dry up. And now because the world trades less with the US, dollars as a consequence becomes less useful. And this is one big reason why we are seeing the strength of the dollar crash by almost 10 or 11% today. The dollar is simply becoming less useful in the world. Now, if we look at the demand for treasury bonds, we can see yields staying stubbornly high. And this shouldn't be the case when it comes to a period of crisis. I think we can all imagine that this tariff war is a crisis. And over the past 10, 20, 30 years, every time where there's been a kind of global systemic shift or panic, the default move is to run to the dollar. The default move is to buy dollars and put your money into so-called safe haven assets such as treasury bonds, US debt. But that is not happening. Bond yields are going up or they're staying high. The strength of the dollar itself is going down. And it all kind of makes sense, right? If you're earning less dollars from the US and Trump with his insane $3.4 trillion tax bill that just came out, he's going to increase borrowing by at least $340 billion for the next 10 years. Now, the increase in debt is guaranteed, but the increase in productivity, that's a gamble, right? You know, we don't know whether it's going to manifest, but we know that the debt is going to increase. And because the bond yield is so high, the interest payments is going to spiral out of control as well. And if we look at what China has been doing since November, October, they have been increasing their stockpiles of gold. Now, the Chinese, I'm sure they have more gold than what they are trying to say that they have. But by telling the world that, oh, we are stacking, we are increasing our reserves by 100,000 ounces a month, or we are increasing it by 40 tons over the last quarter or so, it's basically a big Batman signal to the world that we want to shift our focus away from treasury bonds into another alternative asset of choice. Now, for China, that could be gold. Other countries, they are also, since they're not earning dollars, they're going to put it into other various aspects. But I think for people who really doubt the trend of de-dollarization, you just need to look at two things seriously. Three things: the strength of the dollar going down. Secondly, we need to look at the amount of treasury bonds as a percentage of global central bank holdings is also going down. And countries around the world, their gold holdings are going up. And let me just end with China's gold holdings that they reportedly announced to the world. I think before the Ukraine war, China's gold holdings as a percentage of their forex reserves was around 2.5 to 3%. And now it has skyrocketed up all the way to 6%. So it's a doubling of the reserves that they want to show the world in just a matter of 3 to 4 years. So you can see that Biden started the ball rolling, but Trump's going to push it off the cliff.
Yeah. And Anastasia, I wanted your take on then, is de-dollarization what makes the United States, especially under Donald Trump, this current administration, so afraid of BRICS? Is that just one element to it? What is your analysis and take on this?
I think Trump administration is afraid of consolidation of global South. They got used to have that strategy, carrot and stick. You know that for one country there is a stick, like Russia, for example, China. For another, it's a carrot, like we saw in the beginning. It was with South Africa, it was with India. So divide and conquer. So that strategy. And now we see that this strategy, no, it doesn't work. So global South is very, from summit to summit, we see that more people, more representation, highest representations, more countries want to join. So global South becomes more and more consolidated around BRICS. And so I think this fact scares Trump administration more, that they cannot use their strategy anymore. That's it.
Yeah, same question to you, Warwick. Donald Trump has specifically cited de-dollarization as the almost the big threat coming from BRICS. If any country does this, then we're going to slap 100% tariffs. That's what he said in the beginning. Now it's 10% tariffs for anyone commingling with BRICS. So what's your take on why BRICS is so scary to Donald Trump's administration, but honestly, the U.S. Itself, the U.S. political establishment?
Look, it just represents a change of system, right? So the global economic system revolved around the US economy for a long time and its ability to dictate terms unilaterally. That's changed. The United States is no longer in a position to dictate terms unilaterally, and those realities, I think, are starting to dawn on those in Washington. And when you are experiencing a significant episode of displacement from a position of centrality, then a high degree of anxiety, I think, naturally comes with it. So I think that that's fundamentally what's going on here. The United States also, I think, is struggling with competing and contradictory objectives. So on the one hand, it seeks to maintain as best as it can a position of economic hegemony, and it talks a lot about dollar dominance. Trump himself has made it very clear that threats to the centrality or the dominant position of the US dollar would be seen as an anti-American move. But on the other hand, the United States has aspirations to redevelop its industrial base. Now, you're not going to redevelop an industrial base if your economic system perpetuates the dominance of finance capital, and this is precisely what the current setup has done over the last 40 years in particular. So as the United States economic system financialized, the resources of the United States economy progressively drifted towards the finance sector, away from industrial production, and industrial production drifted to other parts of the world. These are systemic and structural features of how the American political economy has unfolded over the course of the last 4+ decades. And these are contradictory. All right. So at heart, you have an American political economy that wants to have its cake and to eat it at the same time. And unfortunately, that's actually not possible. It's not going to come anywhere near reindustrializing America unless it tackles the dominance of the US dollar. But it doesn't want to tackle the dominance of the US dollar, so it's never going to get anywhere near creating the macro conditions necessary for reindustrialization. It's boxed itself into a corner, and consequently it lashes out. The rest of the world is moving on. I think the reactions to the tariffs on so-called Liberation Day, we didn't see dozens of countries lining up to kiss the arse of the US president. In fact, what we saw was countries hedging, slowing down, collaborating, coordinating with each other, ultimately to mitigate their own risks and to also lay the pathways to a future environment that is less susceptible to these kinds of American bullying and pressure. The letters that have been going out, you touched on those, talk about the lack of reciprocity and how, again, the United States will unilaterally impose, X tariff and Y tariff. That just simply reinforces the message to the world that the United States is not interested in good faith discussions with partners to identify win-win outcomes or mutually beneficial outcomes, but is really in this game, if you will, to pursue zero-sum objectives.
Yeah. Well, what's Anastasia, please.
I would like to add something to Warwick's. The United States, they try to at least make an image of BRICS like an enemy. Because all that, we know that American economy is built on that fact that they should struggle against an enemy every time, everywhere. Right. And they want to picture BRICS as an enemy. And but the fact is, BRICS is not against the United States or against European Union. It's just an alternative. It's just an alternative. If one country decides to join BRICS or collaborate with BRICS and to trade with BRICS, it's okay. But if the same country continues trading with the United States, Canada, European Union, it's okay. So they're not one polar and another. No, BRICS is BRICS. It's not against someone. It's just an opportunity to other countries to see the difference, to see the alternative. That's it. And this fact scares. This fact scares.
Yeah. Well, it's a fundamental shift. As you said, Anastasia and Sean, what's quite stunning about this moment is that while BRICS is being labeled an enemy of the United States' financialized world
Yeah.
economic system, uh, Donald Trump's administration is going after countries that are not necessarily in BRICS and might not even have any interest in BRICS. For example, South Korea and Japan, both of these countries have just been leveled with pretty significant tariffs. And these are countries that not only see themselves as allies of the US, but have very small, if not zero, tariffs on US products. So, what's your thoughts on this? How does this reflect a broader economic trend that you've been analyzing?
Sure. I think we need to realize that what is the end game of the United States? Now, back in 2023, or was it 2024, Janet Yellen, she went to China and she was talking about a lot of friend shoring, right? You know, the nerve going to China, telling everyone to friend shore with the US. The US will cut trade with China and they will just, give the production to the rest of the world. But the moment she said that, I knew that it was quite a bit of a BS. The end game of the US is reshoring, not friendshoring. So once we get this idea into context, we can understand what Trump is trying to do. Now look at all the countries he's going after, including his allies. When you talk about EU, 20%. When you talk about South Korea and Japan, it's around 20 to 30%. And you have to sit back and ask yourself why. Because all the major industries that Trump wants to shift back to the United States, well, these countries have them, right? We have Volkswagen from Germany, you have BM, Mercedes from the Germans. When you look at the Japanese, what do they have? They have semiconductor companies, they have Tokyo Electron, they have, Toyota, Honda. And when you look at South Korea, same thing, Samsung. They create all the chips, semiconductors, and the phones. And if we look at this through this lens, what Trump is trying to do is use the tariffs to deindustrialize the world. And this is why many countries, including the Koreans and Japanese, there's such a big friction together with Trump. Because let's say they really kowtow to the tariffs, or they move all their production to the United States, this actually opens them to two big problems, right? Now, firstly, their local economies, at least in those industries, is going to collapse, right? If all their production shifts to the US, where all the jobs going to shift to? Definitely to the United States. And secondly, it opens their behind to yet another potential sanctions down the road. Let's say you shift all your production there. Right now, your entire industrial base is going to be very dependent on the US consumer market. And a lot of nasty things, a lot of weird things can always happen that we can't really predict, right? For example, let's say South Korea shifts a factory there. There could be a lot of, capital controls coming on. For example, let's say they make $500 million profit, right? There's nothing to say that one day down the road, maybe they need to channel some of that profits into US assets or store it in the US bank indefinitely. You can't really repatriate the amount of money back home. And in the new tax bill, I'm not so sure whether they enacted it, but there was talk about capital controls when it comes to countries where Trump believes that the tariffs they impose are unfair trading partners. So by doing this, Trump is actually spooking out countries from adopting a kind of free market model where they go to where it is best to manufacture. Right now, it's undisputedly countries in the BRICS, especially China, but Trump is trying to reshuffle this entire game plan. And to really emphasize why most likely it will fail is because of the tariffs themselves. I think we can all agree on this panel that US supply chains are fractured, right? And fractured is being very generous right now. The US doesn't have rare earths. 80 to 90% is controlled by China, and I think maybe 100% is all controlled by the BRICS as well. The US really doesn't have a lot of base metals relative to what they want to reshore their industries over there. And by imposing a 10, 20%, 30% tariff, for example, on aluminum, on steel as well, the US is just jacking up their price of production, cost of production much higher. So countries look at that. All right, if I manufacture stuff in the US, it's going to be more expensive. All my goods will be locked in the US. I can forget about exporting it out to the world. And secondly, I'm exposing myself to sanctions. So I think Trump is really riding this self-defeating wheel right here.
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Powell, maybe you could elaborate on this, because it appears that what the U.S. is doing under Trump, but this is not necessarily specific to Trump, is that, as you said, the payment systems, de-dollarization, it really is a reflection of a broader mode of production and production system. And the U.S. seems to be cutting itself off from that system. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, the distribution of production systems across the world has evolved, right, over many decades, and trying to turn all of that on its head, literally by manipulating relative prices, is highly unlikely to work. And that's largely because a lot of these systems that now exist are so finely calibrated that even changes to relative pricing, by which I mean the imposition of tariffs on goods from certain countries, won't be sufficient to warrant the dislocations that would be required to upend production systems and try to rebuild them in another jurisdiction. The challenge that the US is ultimately going to face, should it seek to reindustrialize, and I suspect it's not going to succeed in this particular ambition, but should it seek to do this, it's going to need to dramatically weaken the role of finance capital within its economic model, number one. Secondly, it's going to need to import a substantial amount of capital goods. The United States simply does not manufacture enough machinery, robotics and otherwise, that it would need to build the production capacity that it seems to aspire to. Thirdly, it's going to need to dramatically increase its imports of intermediate and raw materials. It simply doesn't have those available within its domestic economic system. Now, as Sean mentioned, in all of those respects, should they impose tariffs from products supplied from other countries, they're literally going to increase their own costs. And ultimately, the adjustment process that the United States will make as a response to tariffs is to move towards a higher cost plateau economic structure. If that means it detaches itself from the rest of the world, then that's one of the things it can do. And that will be a consequence of these sorts of tariffs, and ultimately the extent to which it's successful or not successful in making the production adjustments. This isn't going to happen overnight. This is the other point to remember, is that production systems that take decades to evolve don't just suddenly materialize in different ways just because of relative price shifts. You're not going to see complex supply chains and complex factories and their ecosystems pop up because a politician wants it to. They're difficult things to create and to optimize. And you're looking at anywhere from 4 to 10 years and sometimes even longer for these sorts of ecosystems to emerge and ultimately to be able to function properly. We're talking about production systems, information systems, infrastructure, and ultimately also a skilled workforce. And frankly, the United States doesn't have a workforce that has the foundational literacy and numeracy skills that you're going to need for the sorts of industries that we're talking about. This is a multi-generational problem that isn't going to get solved in this particular way. And again, the rest of the world will just simply move on. It's reached a point where I think this BRICS Summit showed that, and the reactions of countries to the Liberation Day tariff shows that they've reached a point where they've made it clear to the United States that what the United States wants to do is not in the United States' interest, and it's not in anyone else's interests. But if the United States insists on doing it, then the rest of the world will move on. The threshold has been reached, and and people, I think you would probably say, are literally shaking their heads and shrugging their shoulders.
Yeah, I definitely want all of your answers to this. We'll begin with Anastasia regarding the forecast here for BRICS and really for the entire world order as we see massive shifts. While many, especially collective West mainstream media outlets, try to downplay the significance of the BRICS 2025 summit, it's quite clear that there are massive changes occurring worldwide. And it spells bad news for the US's financial stranglehold and really its overall stranglehold over the world. So, Anastasia, what's your forecast now, given what occurred at this BRICS summit, but really the massive changes surrounding it?
I should say that the final declaration that the leaders signed, it tells a lot of new things that were never said before. For example, the reorganization of United Nations, well, not reorganization, giving additional seats to global South countries that we do not have right now. So there were a role of NDB, I think, this year when India will take 2026. It will be India's year in BRICS. And the next year, 2026, we will see the rising importance of new development bank. I feel that because new investments, we know that China is investing a lot in global South, India, and other new countries that joined the BRICS. So new development bank will take the central role. And it was told that during the summit, it was told that new development bank enters its second golden decade. So I suppose that the focus for the BRICS countries will be that there will be a lot of new investments in infrastructure, like NDB is the bank for investment. I hope that soon we will see new BRICS payment system. So the de-dollarization will go ahead. Of course, it won't be simple and fast. Of course not. And no one's say that tomorrow the dollar will be out of use at all. No, not of course. But the long road is done with the first step. And this step is done already.
Yeah, Sean, same question to you, especially given your coverage of the importance of China in particular as part of this rising BRICS multipolar world order. What's your forecast, market forecast, economic forecast, given this development?
Sure. I think Anastasia's made it very clear about de-dollarization is going to continue. So I won't harp on that point. But I want to harp on another point, right? So, Danny, as you say that China is going to be the linchpin of everything, and basically they are the ones powering the industrial heart of BRICS. Now, just recently, I think China has been selling a lot of cheap energy, a lot of cheap solar panels to the rest of the BRICS members to really power up their entire industries. So what I'm very hopeful about is in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years, BRICS as a whole will be a much more powerful manufacturing hub compared to the United States, compared to the G7. And going forward, I think we can really see multiple industries across the board when it comes to manufacturing cars, when it comes to even manufacturing steel, when it comes to manufacturing semiconductors, of course. I think more of these centers of power will be shifted more towards the BRICS countries. Because I believe that at the end of the day, when we look at a big overarching competition between the US and China, it all revolves around the future of productivity, which is semiconductors. And right now, if we look carefully at how China is investing in the world, they're helping to build up the building blocks of BRICS when it comes to high capacity, high volume, and high precision manufacturing. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see a very incredible shift, a technology shift that will shift to the rest of BRICS. I mean, just look at how China is, working with Malaysia and semiconductor hub to build more semiconductor partnerships over there. And I think this is one key area that we should not overlook as well.
Thanks. And Dr. Powell, your assessment, same question.
I love that we just get to add on each other's answers so that we don't have to go over old territory. I'll add two more things. One touches on a joint statement from the BRICS Summit, which touches on the future of artificial intelligence governance. I think that there is a lot of work that needs to be done in relation to AI specifically, but also in relation to information system sovereignty more generally. And I would expect that over the forward-looking years, we're going to see a lot more developments in technology systems that are grounded in open source foundations and which enable countries to develop their own ecosystems, but nonetheless maintain interoperability. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, which I'll touch on, is slightly more abstracted from Anastasia and Sean's comments, but really I think hopefully provides a bit of a wrapper around all of this to help us understand what the transformations are. And fundamentally, the transformations go to an ongoing pursuit of systems that deliver a higher energy return on energy invested. And what China is doing is pursuing systems, a whole array of energy generating, storage and distribution systems that deliver a higher energy return on energy invested. And in doing so, making those technologies and capabilities available to others in the world. And that will be fundamentally transformative. So both of these points around information systems and energy systems go to the heart of the ability of countries to map out their own development trajectories in ways that are relatively immune from the interferences of others.
Yeah, no. Does anyone else have any final thoughts before I let you all go? And everyone stay tuned because there's a lot more show to come. But anyone have any final thoughts they want to get in before we end here? All right. Well, it was really great to be with all of you. It was great to have you, Sean, and Anastasia for the first time. Thanks so much for coming, Dr. Powell. It's always a pleasure. And I hope to have you all again, either separately or together sometime soon as we trace and track this multipolar world. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Have a good night.
See you. See you, Danny.
All right. See ya. Bye-bye, Warwick. All right, everybody. We have more show to come because I actually want to react to the Tucker Carlson interview with President of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. So we are going to actually do that in Masoud Pezeshkian. Sorry. We are actually going to do that because that is, I think, very important. This just came out in the last 24 or so hours. So everyone hit that like button and stick around because there's more show to go. For those who are just coming in, if you're seeing this live or you're just coming in, you can just rewind back to the beginning so you can see Dr. Warwick Powell, Anastasia Galyakova, and Sean Foo give their really sharp analysis and important analysis of the BRICS Summit. But let us get started. I don't do this very often live anymore, so let us get started with the interview that Tucker Carlson gave and Tucker Carlson conducted with Masoud Pezeshkian, the president of Iran. So here we go. Tucker Carlson interviewed Masoud Pezeshkian of Iran in a bombshell development that follows up Tucker Carlson's interview in early February 2024, where he interviewed Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, Iran is coming off a U.S.-Israeli backed attack on its sovereignty, a significant one that killed nearly 1,000 Iranians. There was a bombing of Iran's nuclear sites, and there was a massive response to both the U.S. and Israel with Operation True Promise 3, which landed heavy blows to Israel and forced Israel to beg for a ceasefire, which it eventually struck on that 12th day of hostilities. Now, this is often viewed as an Israel-Iran war, but of course, the United States is deep at the heart of it. And as this interview was released, Donald Trump was meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House, and reports indicate that Trump will greenlight future attacks on Iran by Israel. This is really Donald Trump's modus operandi, is to make this more about Israel-Iran than, of course, the U.S.-Iran situation. Donald Trump does have a brand to protect, after all. But let us react to this interview. It's going to be played on 1.5 speed, just so we can get through the entire thing. It's about 30 minutes long, but we should be able to really get to a lot of it as we go along here, and I will stop as needed. So here we go.
Mr. President, thank you very much for doing this. There is a pause, or seems to be a pause, in the war between the United States and Iran. How do you think this will end? How would you like to see it end?
We did not start this war, and we do not want this war to continue in any way. From the very beginning, it was the motto of my administration that I always adhere to, and that was fostering the national unity inside the country, and also fostering peace and tranquility and friendship with the neighboring countries and with the rest of the world.
The American President Donald Trump has said that the United States bombed your enrichment facilities because the government of Iran refused to give up its nuclear program, and that there can be no peace until Iran does give up that nuclear program. Would you be willing to give up the nuclear program in exchange for peace?
I would like to tell you what has happened, and it was Netanyahu since 1984 has created this false mentality that Iran seeks a nuclear bomb, and it has insinuated that Iran is trying to develop a nuclear bomb in the.
So I want to just say that I understand the framing here from President Pezeshkian, but it wasn't just Netanyahu. Netanyahu indeed has repeatedly, 1984 and onward, said that Iran is weeks away from a nuclear weapon, a week away, days away. But the United States has been doing this too. It's important. I understand that Pezeshkian and Iran want to negotiate with the United States, especially around sanctions alleviation. So I understand the circumstances. But at the same time, it must be noted that to just claim Israel is maybe not the full picture here. But let's continue.
The past, and it has put it in the minds of every U.S. president since then, and to make them believe that we would like to have a nuclear bomb. But the truth is that we have never been after developing a nuclear bomb, not in the past, not presently, or in the future, because this is wrong, and this is in contrast to the religious decree or the fatwa, which has been issued by His Eminence, the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, that so it is religiously forbidden for us to go after a nuclear bomb. And this was always corroborated thanks to our cooperation with IAEA, because they were always there that to verify this and to substantiate that we have never wanted a nuclear bomb. But unfortunately, this cooperation was disturbed by the unlawful attacks against our nuclear facilities.
And I want to add to this too, everybody, that when we're looking at when we're talking about these nuclear attacks, we are not just talking about Israel disrupting the negotiations because the Israeli regime wanted to undermine the United States and Iran's talks. No, we are talking about Donald Trump, literally the administration and Israel collaborating together to use negotiations to lull Iran into a kind of maybe sleepwalk, so that it wasn't aware of this coming attack, that this attack was being planned by Israel with the US's green light and, of course, coordination, because Israel doesn't do anything without the United States outside of its own so-called borders. But really, it doesn't do anything without the United States knowing, understanding, and really approving. And we have proof of this now, that the United States was using negotiations in this way. So again, Pezeshkian is looking at this through the prism of Israel disrupting U.S.-Iran talks, because Iran does have plans to reduce and get rid of these sanctions. This is very important, and this is very understandable. But of course, we here have to talk about the full picture. So let's continue.
So you have, according to news reports, withdrawn your cooperation from IAEA, the International Nuclear Regulatory Agency. And so there's, I suppose, no way for the rest of the world to know how much uranium you're enriching and to what extent, to what percentage is being enriched. And so is there any way to verify, and would you be willing to allow other nations to verify that you are not building nuclear weapons?
Mr. Carson, sir, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we were right in the middle of holding talks with the United States, and the President of the United States invited us to hold such talks in order to have peace. And we were told during the process of these negotiations and talks that as long as we don't give the permission to Israel, they are not going to attack you. And we were going to have the next round of the talks very soon, but in the middle of it, suddenly Israel torpedoed the negotiating table. We were sitting at the negotiating table when it happened, and by doing this, they totally ruined and destroyed diplomacy. And in order to answer your question with regards to the surveillance or the supervision over our nuclear program, I would like to say that we are ready to hold talks over it. We have never been the party that has run away from verification. We stand ready to have these supervisions, but unfortunately, as a result of the United States unlawful attacks against our nuclear centers and installations, many of the pieces of equipment and the facilities there have been severely damaged. Therefore, we don't have any access to them. We cannot see, and unless this access is going to be back there again, we have to wait for it and to see what happens and how much they have been damaged so that we can go for the supervision.
So that was actually quite significant in many ways, right? Pezeshkian basically admitted there that Iran's facilities have been significantly damaged, so much so that access is difficult to get to understand what the extent is, how long does it delay the production of this enriched uranium. But Iran, what Pezeshkian didn't say here was that Iran actually had evacuated all of its enriched uranium days, maybe even weeks before even the Israeli attack happened. So this was predicted. It was known that there was going to be attack on Iran. It's probably known inside of Iran's government that there would be, in military apparatus, that there would be many attacks coming on it. So it prepared the way to ensure that its enriched uranium is protected. But it has, Pezeshkian here is admitting that the facilities are damaged. At the same time, though, it's still important to note that Iran's cooperation with the IAEA has been suspended completely, and for good reason. And here, what Iran's president Masoud Pezeshkian is doing is saying, well, we have been good faith parties to all kinds of nuclear inspections, and it's Israel, particularly citing Israel, that has undermined nuclear talks. And while this is factual on the face of it, we still have to emphasize that the United States and Israel are collaborating together to ensure that this nuclear pretext not only is the main and primary force for a regime change operation against Iran. And Pezeshkian's existence here, remind you, President Masoud Pezeshkian's presence here in this interview is a testament to the fact that Iran defeated this iteration of a regime change attempt against Iran. But it also has to be stated that this attack on Iran, the nuclear pretext is just that. It's a pretext. So Iran will, of course, do everything it has to do and everything it does by the book of international law up until a point when its sovereignty was violated. Now there cannot be the same kind of cooperation. We know that the Israeli regime sent in its own spy network into the IAEA to gather data, and the IAEA was not only not protected, but it was collaborating and ensuring that this kind of infiltration could occur. So really what we're looking at is a completely muddled, destroyed, decimated kind of world order. There is no nuclear inspection organization. It is truly a U.S. and Israeli tool for regime change, particularly against Iran. Because to be quite honest, we don't see these inspectors doing anything when it comes to the U.S., the Israeli regime. I mean, these countries not only have nuclear weapons, but the U.S. is the only one to have used them. In Israel, let's be quite honest, Israel, just from a moral and international law perspective, has absolutely no business owning nuclear weapons itself, given the dangerousness of its regime to not only Palestine, but the entire world. But let us continue on with the video.
There have been news reports that you believe, your government believes, that the IAEA was spying on the government of Iran and passing information to Israel. Do you believe that? And if so, do you have evidence that that's true that the world could see?
I would like to tell you that we were, yes, somehow pessimistic about the activities of the IAEA, because somehow we realized that Israel could get information from the inspections which were carried out by the IAEA, but it never prevented the IAEA from carrying out their activities inside Iran, and they had full access to supervise and to have surveillance over our nuclear facilities. But there was this lack of trust as a result of the last report by IAEA. The type of the report and the way they prepared the report somehow gave an excuse to the Israeli regime and prepared the ground for their unlawful and unauthorized attack against our nuclear facilities. And even after that, the IAEA failed to condemn these attacks or try to anyway to stop them. And this ran counter to the international law, and this resulted in a widespread lack of trust among the Iranians, Iranian legislators, and the public opinion here.
So before we move on, I just want to say that is an understatement of the century. Of course, President Pezeshkian is exactly right. There has been a complete eradication of trust between Iran, the Iranian people, and the so-called nuclear inspection agency, the IAEA. But it's worse than that. As I said, it was literally used as a weapon to conduct information intelligence, to assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists, to conduct these strikes, which have caused so much damage to Iran's infrastructure. And the United States was building up the pretext in using, under the Trump administration, using this kind of narrative to build up, and using negotiations themselves to build up toward this moment, which is not over, by the way, because we know not only is Netanyahu and Trump talking about future green lighting of attacks by Israel on Iran, but we also know that from Donald Trump to Lindsey Graham to the entirety of the U.S. foreign policy establishment, they are still talking about nuclear Iran. Oh, we don't know. It's going to take a few months, years for them to rebuild. But at any point, they can revive this. And what the point of the strike that the U.S. did in the waning days of the so-called 12-day war was not about eradicating anything. It wasn't about preventing the bomb. No, it was about using that pretext as a testing ground for what a strike would look like, and to continue on with the possibilities of using Israel as that primary attack dog to weaken Iran over time, and the U.S. kind of coming in and finishing the job, so to speak, as so many in the U.S.'s foreign policy brass like to say. So this is a dangerous situation indeed, but let's continue on with the interview.
You've suggested that you were anxious to resolve your conflicts with the United States through diplomacy, and that was derailed by war. Would you be willing to restart diplomacy? And could you tell us in general but precise terms the kind of deal you would be willing to accept?
You see, I am of the belief that we could very much easily resolve our differences and conflicts with the United States through dialogue and talks. And, the international law could serve as the framework or the basis for a deal.
No. I mean, this is where, look, I'm not familiar with Masoud Pezeshkian's political orientation here. I'm not familiar with his politics. There have been a lot of critics. He's too soft. He's too weak. He doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. Look, he's the president of Iran, and under Operation True Promise 3 and what we saw in that 12-day war, it was quite clear that the leadership of Iran was very disciplined, very much capable of defending themselves. But here, this kind of comment, I think it's naivete. Let's be honest. The idea that the United States and Iran can talk to each other and come to some kind of quote unquote deal is absolute fiction. The United States in this 12-day war completely obliterated any kind of, as Przeskin said earlier, trust. But it's worse than that. It's not just the eradication of trust. It's the fact that the U.S. literally bombed Iran, a violation of not only international law that Przeskin states here, but an act of war, which only builds on the entirety of the hybrid war against Iran, from the sanctions to the military buildup around it, and of course to the constant incessant PR campaign, which led up to, and of course the intelligence gathering and all of that, all of which led up to these strikes. So Przeskin here is saying what a leader needs to say, that wants to so badly and so desperately, to be quite frank, negotiate with the United States to end sanctions. And the only way that any kind of quote unquote deal will ever happen between the U.S. and Iran is if the U.S. is in such a weak position that it has to move away from the conflict theater of West Asia, which, let's be honest, I don't think the U.S. is capable of doing that, given its absolutely rabid imperial lust that it has of this region and how strategic this region is to its overall designs of full spectrum dominance. But that needs to be coupled with Iran having an incredible amount of leverage, which at this time, Iran does have leverage. It has its missile stockpile. It has obviously shown that it can defend itself. But that, I don't believe, is enough to prevent the United States from doing what it has historically done in case after case after case. And we are entering a period with the United States. Let's be frank and let's be honest. The United States doesn't really have a stop button. It doesn't have that anymore. And if it ever did, and that's in large part because it is viewing the world as a state of crisis for itself, because the U.S. is losing its influence, it's losing its trust, it's losing its dominance, it's losing its economic power over the globe, and therefore it is completely and utterly reliant on military power. Hence, Iran will continue to be targeted in this way. But let us continue back on with the interview.
In which the rights of all nations, Iranian nation, would be respected. But unfortunately, it was Netanyahu that destroyed these diplomacy and these diplomatic efforts. We have always, we never wanted anything beyond the respect for our rights, rightful rights, enshrined in international law. But as I said, it was Netanyahu that brought unrest to our region, and it's fomenting unrest and tensions in the region. As I have always said, we have always been after peace. It has been my motto. It has been my belief. It has been my heartfelt opinion that we need to live in peace and harmony during this short and limited time granted to us by God Almighty, to live in peace and tranquility with everybody. And everybody in the world should live like that. But I would also like, on the other hand, to reiterate that our people are capable enough to defend themselves in self-defense during any kind of attack. And I believe that the United States president can very well guide the region and the world to peace and tranquility, or, on the other hand, to lead it to forever wars.
Do you have plans to re-enter negotiations with the United States, with Envoy Steve Witkoff or anyone else? And if not, what do you think will happen?
We see no problem in re-entering the negotiations. But before that, I have to remind you that because of the atrocities by the Zionist regime, by Israel, not just against my country, but in the whole region, we are now facing a crisis. The people are facing a crisis that we need to put it behind ourselves. Our commanders were off duty. They were spending the night at their homes with their families, but they were killed. And this is considered a war crime according to the international law, because they were off duty, as I said, or our scientists were also killed and assassinated along with their families and their wives and their children. They were also killed. Pregnant women, children, they were killed in the atrocities, in the attacks of the Israeli regime. Just because they wanted to kill one single person, they had to demolish and destroy a whole building. And as a result of this, a lot of innocent people were killed. A lot of people were killed. And as I said, there is this crisis that we have to put it behind ourselves. And there is a condition, there is a provision for the restarting the talks. How are we going to trust the United States again? We re-enter the negotiations, then how can we know for sure that in the middle of the talks, the Israeli regime will not be given the permission again to attack us?
I mean, that's exactly what we have been saying here. That's exactly what we reviewed here. And Przeshkin said it straight up that any negotiations with the United States will have to be done under the understanding that there will not be future attacks, that there will not be aggression done, that negotiations won't be used as an excuse to conduct aggression on Iran. But to be quite honest here, and again, we have to just state the facts, there is no possibility of that being the case. There was no possibility of this. Look, Iran has to do what it has to do. Iran is under sanctions. Iran does not want to be under sanctions. Iran does not care about nuclear weapons. It's not trying to build a nuclear weapon. So negotiations are simply a tool to try to extract some kind of concessions as a means to free up the country and free up the people of Iran from the impact of sanctions. That is fair, and I will never condemn Iran for this. But the fact is here, the United States, even before any of this happened, before the 12-day war, before the Trump administration entered office, we should have already known that the United States is not really a trustworthy partner or ally. It cannot be trusted in these talks. Donald Trump himself was the one to tear up the JCPOA. That was the United States' doing. Nuclear agreements, even when it was in existence during the Obama administration, we know that Obama violated the sanctions agreement over and over and over again. And this has been done over and over and over again. The case of DPRK North Korea, for example, in the 1990s, a similar thing. The United States doesn't really sign treaties to abide by them. It doesn't sign anything, agreements to abide by them. The United States, as an empire, looks after itself and its interests, not first and foremost, but only. It only sees any kind of negotiations, any kind of agreements as a tool, as a weapon for its own pursuit of full spectrum dominance. And this is what Iran can continue to expect as it now goes back into the mode of trying to negotiate with the United States to end these sanctions. It also has to be preparing, and I think it is preparing. We've heard reports not only that Iran is arming itself with China's J-10C, the Chengdu fighter jets that were so successful in the Pakistan-India conflict on the Pakistani side, but we also have heard from the Middle East Eye recently that Iran is pursuing and potentially purchasing missile air defense systems from China too. And of course, this signifies a huge shift in the multipolar world where now you have countries arming themselves and participating in defense cooperation toward that end. So big developments. Iran definitely needs to prepare for a long war, and it appears that's exactly what it is doing. Let's continue.
Do you believe the Israeli government tried to assassinate you?
They did try, yes. and they acted accordingly, but they failed. And as a true believer, I believe that it is in the hands of the God Almighty to determine when a person will die or will not die. If he wills, the God Almighty wills, then you can die when you are walking freely in the streets. And but I would like to tell you that I am not afraid of sacrificing myself for in defense of my country and in safeguarding and defending the sovereignty, the freedom and the independence of my country. I'm willing to give my life, to give blood for that. And nobody here, I mean, none of the government officials is afraid of losing their lives in line of defense. But will it bring security to the region? I mean, bloodshed, more bloodshed, assassination, killing others. Will it bring peace and tranquility and stability to the region?
With respect, can you tell us how you know that you were an assassination target? A week and a half ago, I don't believe I've seen that confirmed anywhere. How are you certain they tried to kill you?
Of course, it was not the U.S. that was behind my the attempt.
So, okay, key points here, just quickly. One, Tucker Carlson. I mean, I think this is a wasted question, to be honest, because we know that Israel and the United States collaborating with it just conducted a major decapitation strike on Iran, killing almost all of its major generals in the IRGC, and was actively targeting Israel Katz. No irony there. The so-called defense minister of Israel said straight up that Israel was pursuing Ayatollah Khamenei. And then what did Donald Trump do? As the ceasefire, which is really a cessation of hostilities, came out, he posted a rendition of the Beach Boys' Barbara Ann, or whatever it's called, to the tune of Bomb, 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 Iran. And in it, the lyrics said just verbatim that the Ayatollah is going to be put in a box, aka killed. So the United States and Israel we're literally trying to conduct regime change here. Tucker Carlson should be asking this question, but of course, Pezeshkian here, I don't believe this is correct, actually. But he says that the U.S. wasn't behind this. Let's be honest. There's no way that if the Mossad, if Israeli military forces, if they were conducting a decapitation strike and trying to hunt down Ayatollah Khamenei and Masoud Pezeshkian, that the United States wasn't involved. There's absolutely no possibility of that whatsoever. But let's continue.
On my life, it was Israel. I was in a meeting. We were discussing the ways to move forward, but thanks to the intelligence by the spies that they had, they tried to bombard the area that we were holding that meeting, in which we were holding that meeting. But as I told you before, it is God who wills when a person will die and give up his life. And once again, I would like to emphasize that we are not afraid of martyrdom. We are not afraid of sacrificing our lives for our people, for our independence. And I would like to tell you that this imposed war by the Israeli regime resulted in one thing, and that was more solidarity and unity amongst the Iranian people. And it proved yet once again that the Iranian people, no matter where they are in the whole wide world, they do care about their country, about the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of their motherland. And as I said, this brought about more solidarity, and it united us further. Thanks to this act of aggression by the Israeli regime. My proposal is that the U.S. administration should refrain from getting involved in a war that is not its war, that is not America's war. It is Netanyahu's war that is having its devilish machinations for the whole region. It has its own agenda. He has its own agenda, Netanyahu, I mean, inhuman agenda, and that is having forever wars that go on and on and on. And this is my proposal to the United States, not to be fooled by Netanyahu, not to be dragged into this kind of war.
Many Americans are afraid of.
I'm going to skip that part, Americans being afraid of Iran, because we can get to that piece quite. We're going to talk. Let's go to the part about Donald Trump here. But to respond to this. Again, you see the framing here that Israel is really kind of acting alone and that the United States wasn't involved. Again, that should be taken with a grain of salt. This is about opening up any kind of space to negotiate the sanctions away. I don't believe any of that space exists, but I understand why the Iranian government, why President Pezeshkian would want to explore that in the face of now what was a failed regime change attempt that the U.S., let's be also honest here, to be fair to Pezeshkian, the U.S. and Israel at this point, if they were to conduct another operation like this again anytime soon, they would be doing more damage to themselves than they could do to Iran. Iran has proven, as Pezeshkian said here, that there's solidarity among the Iranian people. Iran has defense capabilities, and those defense capabilities could pound Israel again. I mean, I've heard anywhere between 5% to 25% of Iran's missile stockpile was depleted in that 12 days. So that means Iran has quite a number of options here to continue its Operation True Promise, whatever. If it's 4 next time, whatever they want to call it, it could happen again. And we saw what happened to the Weizmann Institute. We saw what happened to Haifa. We saw what happened to Tel Aviv. We know that the destruction is in the billions for Israel. We know Israel depleted its air defense systems in just 12 days, and it would be even worse the next time around. So again, while Pezeshkian can be criticized, and I understand where the criticisms come from about negotiating with the United States, and maybe placing all the blame on Israel is not 100% accurate. But at the same time, I understand the political machinations here and how Iran is actually now talking about this from a position of strength. And I want to commend Pezeshkian here also for acknowledging that Iranians and the Iranian military, the Iranian people, do have the capabilities to defend themselves. And that's a very important point to make. But now let's get to the Donald Trump conversation, because I did find this actually quite interesting that Tucker Carlson predictably addressed these claims that have been made about Iran and Donald Trump. Here we go.
By others.
2 Iranian ayatollahs have issued fatwas against Donald Trump. What does that mean exactly, and what do you think of it?
To the best of my knowledge, they have not issued decrees or fatwas against any individual or against Donald Trump. And first off, it has nothing to do with the Iranian government or to His Eminence, the Supreme Leader of Iran. Or what they actually meant by the fatwa was in condemnation of an insult to a religion or religious personalities. And they were actually saying that this is deplorable, this is unacceptable. So it was not directed towards the U.S. president or any other individual. And there might be people with their own ideas and opinions. But I can assure you that the meaning of this fatwa should not be construed or considered as a threat against an individual.
Has Iran ever backed an assassination attempt against Donald Trump?
This is actually what Netanyahu is trying to insinuate and to make your people or the president of your country to believe. But this is wrong, because Netanyahu, as I said, has its own agenda. It wants to drag the U.S. into forever wars, as I said, and to bring more insecurity, instability, and unrest to the whole region.
There are some large number of Iranian nationals living in the United States. Some have said they are, quote, sleeper cells. They are terrorists who are acting at the command of your government. Would you right now make a statement to Iranian citizens living in the United States not to commit acts of violence in the United States?
You see, these things you're telling me, this is the first time I'm hearing them from you or from anybody. You know, the Iranians are known for their knowledge, for their science, for their courtesy, for being civilized. Have you seen otherwise from them, any other kind of behavior from them, or any violent behavior? Has anybody ever seen anything from them? Yeah, as I said, this is what Israel is trying to put into your minds. They are propagating that Iranians might be capable of doing such a thing, but this is totally untrue, because by nature Iranians are pro peace and tranquility, and they're trying to actually to somehow impact the minds of the decision makers and the people of the United States, and to scare them into getting involved in a war in my region that is not going to ensure any kind of interest for the United States. It is not to be in the interest of the United States to be involved in any kind of war in my region.
So, I mean, let's be honest. Tucker Carlson here, I understand why he should address this and needs to address this, because it's what the mainstream media says all the time. It's what Washington has been purveying and spreading around, this propaganda. But again, this is the fantasy world that the U.S. is forced to live under, because the foreign policy establishment and the elites that control it, their interests are so deeply wedded to full spectrum dominance over this region. Iran being the big threat here because of its sovereignty, its role in the multipolar world, its steadfast support for Palestine and the resistance. Iran is persona non grata. It has to be eliminated and eradicated. So, of course, the United States has to make up, of course, the U.S. foreign policy establishment has to make up all kinds of strange tales about Iran. They've done it with Russia. They've done it with China. Propaganda war, atrocity propaganda. But here with Iran, it's completely a fantasy world, because you can search all you want. You can try to find all the evidence and reports that you want. You won't be able to find a credible report about some kind of sleeper cell terror attack. And of course, all of the misgivings and talks about assassinations on Trump and attacks on Trumps from Iran are all just coming from intelligence sources, likely the CIA, likely the Mossad, likely some one of those three-letter agencies in the United States that are doing this for the benefit of endless war. So that question itself, I mean, a very easy answer for Pezeshkian, and one that I will say is 100% true in terms of the way that a leader like this, I understand why he is talking the way he is. He wants to sever, Pezeshkian wants to sever that bond that people, Americans may have still, maybe some who are watching Tucker Carlson's program, of unity and partnership with Israel. He wants the United States, people in the United States, to see Israel as not acting in the benefit of them. So in that respect, that's understandable. On the other hand, of course, I don't necessarily 100% agree with the idea that Israel is dragging the United States into war. The United States has been at war in West Asia for decades upon decades. And it didn't even start with a war on terror. And Iran has deep history and knowledge of that, given that in 1953, the CIA was key working with its British counterparts to overthrowing the government of Iran. So let's continue.
It wasn't that long ago, it was during the revolutionary period in Iran, that Iran had relations with Israel and commercial relations with Israel and reputedly bought weapons from Israel. What happened? How did that change? Who changed it and why, that relationship?
Israel itself is to blame because just look at what they have been doing in the last couple of years in Palestine, in Gaza. What Netanyahu has been doing, killing women and children, bombing schools and hospitals and civilian and residential areas. This is nothing short of a full-scale genocide. There, they have blocked the entry of food and medicine, any kind of humanitarian relief to Gaza. So this has adversely impacted the way my country and the whole region looks at Israel. And this, I mean, their own behavior and their own actions are to blame, because this is unacceptable what they have been doing in my region. And as far as I know, we have never received any kind of weapon from Israel. And I would like to tell you, even at that time, we did not want to have weapons. We did not want to have wars. We did not want to fight the Iraqis. It was the war that was imposed on us. And just like the way that this war was imposed on us by the Israeli regime, we did not attack Israel. They attacked us.
Can you imagine at the end of the diplomatic exchange with the United States, a world in which American companies invest again in Iran, sanctions are lifted, there is peace in the region? Is that your goal? And do you think it's possible?
From the very beginning of my administration, I first tried to have the domestic solidarity and unity, further unity amongst the Iranian people. Then we tried to have better relations with our neighboring countries of Iran. And then I had this talk with His Eminence, the Supreme Leader of Iran, and during which His Eminence emphasized that there is no limitation and there is nothing preventing the U.S. investors to come to Iran and to make investments in Iran, even presently. There has never been any limitation, anything barring them from coming into Iran, and this is the belief of the Supreme Leader of Iran.
This is an important point, right? Iran doesn't place sanctions on the U.S. The U.S. places sanctions on Iran. So really the question is that Tucker Carlson should be asking, and this is my criticism of Tucker Carlson, and I have many criticisms of Tucker Carlson because I do see the glorification of Tucker Carlson is kind of taking away from the hard work that so many independent analysts and journalists have been doing, traveling to Russia, traveling to the multipolar world, all across it, Iran, China, those building real people-to-people ties, those not only seeking to promote a narrative, promote facts and analysis through that weaves together a narrative against warmongering and against U.S. expansionism, against U.S. imperialism, against U.S. empire, and of course, against Israeli aggression, Zionism, etc. Takes away from their work. And Tucker Carlson, of course, given his stature and his long history as a Fox News journalist and journalist elsewhere, he gets access that others can't. But in this sense here, a lot of times in his interviews, there's a lot of wasted time. And I believe that this question was a waste of time to even ask, because the problem is not with Masoud Pezeshkian, not with the Iranian government, not with Iran. They don't place sanctions on the United States. The U.S. places sanctions on them. The U.S. is starving Iran. The U.S. is trying to starve Iran. It's not succeeding necessarily, but it is trying to cut off and isolate Iran because the overall goal is regime change. So Tucker Carlson should now call up Donald Trump or call up Steve Witkoff. I know he interviewed Steve Witkoff, but he didn't ask these questions. Hey, you're going to lift sanctions on Iran? No, he didn't say that. Maybe you should lift sanctions on Iran. Why shouldn't you, right? These tough questions don't really get asked. Actually, in the Witkoff interview, a lot of people mentioned, and I couldn't even watch most of it because in the Witkoff interview, Witkoff was just promoting Zionist talking points, and very little of it was being challenged. So Tucker Carlson should take his media stature now and begin asking these very same questions. Hey, let's end sanctions against Iran, right? Let's do that. Why not? What interest does it have? Tucker Carlson is very much against war with Iran, and I commend him for that. But why not go further and say, hey, the best path to peace is to end these sanctions. Sanctions have had this effect against Russia. Tucker Carlson spoke out against his opposition to the war on Russia and the sanctions against Russia. Bring that question to U.S. officials and be just as tough. Here we go.
And but once again, I would like to tell you that it is Israel that does not want such things to happen in the region. Israel does not want to see peace and tranquility in the region. But I would like to once again repeat that the United States President, Mr. Trump, is he's capable enough to guide the region towards a peace and a brighter future, and put Israel in its place, or get into a pit, an endless pit or a swamp, and that is a war that Netanyahu wants the United States or the U.S. president to be dragged into. So it is up to the United States president to choose which path that I told you about. And as I told you, there is nothing preventing the commercial or industrial or economic activities by the U.S. Business people and investors. And of course, if there was a limitation, it was caused by the U.S. sanctions, not by us.
Mr. President, my final question: if we wind up in a broader war, could you expect assistance from Russia and China, military and economic assistance from your allies, Russia and China?
We have always put our trust in God, and in God we trust. And we are capable enough to defend ourselves and to stand on our own 2 feet and to defend our country, our territorial integrity to the last drop of our blood. As I have said again and again, we don't want wars. We don't want to develop a nuclear weapon. And this false image, this wrong mentality created in the minds of the U.S. Decision makers and officials is because of the devilish machinations instigated by Netanyahu and the Israeli regime and its policies based on warmongering. And the U.S. president should know that another war will only spread more instability in the Middle East, and it is not going to be in the interest or in favor of the U.S. president or the U.S. government to move in that or towards that direction. They instead need to choose peace and tranquility, which is something that I am and my government and my country are after. And I also, as I said, I believe that the U.S. president is powerful enough to put Israel, to Netanyahu in their place, to contain them and replace warmongering, bloodshed, and conflicts with peace and tranquility.
Mr. President, thank you for taking the time.
So that's it. And he didn't answer that question. Masoud didn't answer that question. That's understandable in one respect, in that the Western mainstream media, we know that Tucker Carlson was attacked heavily by the Zionist influencers, and the Western mainstream media hasn't looked kindly upon this interview. So it's understandable that President Pezeshkian of Iran would not answer the question affirmative. Yes, Russia and Iran are going to help us, or no, Russia and China are going to help us, or no, Russia and China are not going to help us. Why? Because no matter how he answers that question, there will be major a triggering of a narrative war that will either view that kind of statement, that kind of information as reasons to escalate, reasons to demonize, reasons to elevate a kind of Cold War atmosphere. And it's quite obvious that President Pezeshkian of Iran was more focused on speaking to Americans who might watch that interview. So all of that's understandable. In that sense, though, for my purposes, however, it's important to note that I am fully of the agreement and of admiration of Iran's steadfast sovereignty and self-determination, its orientation toward almost a kind of self-reliant, independent political framework. It's very admirable, and honestly, it's not just admirable, but it's something that Iran had to do given the economic war that has been placed against it and imposed upon it by the United States. However, with all that said, it is critical, right? And I will never hold back on this. It is critical that Iran, Russia, China, and the rest of the multipolar world continue forward and accelerate this integration and begin preparations on doing so on the military sphere in ways that can be done that won't necessarily trigger a kind of war with the United States. I understand wanting to avoid war with the United States. I understand wanting to ensure stability and to reject bloc mentalities and alliances and all of this. However, this is what the 12-day war showed us and demonstrated to the world, is that the United States and Israel, they are not afraid to do the unthinkable, even if it's bad for them, in order to pursue objectives that they see as increasingly out of reach, and therefore increasingly the time that hourglass that the U.S. empire has for itself and the Israeli regime, because these two entities are going downward together. Both of them see this historical moment as critical toward escalation. Therefore, it's going to be important that these nations, these countries, and these development models that they are pursuing, the multipolar model, that strengthens. And it's going to have to be done on the military front. There's no way around it, because that is the primary weapon the U.S. is going to use. And we can talk all day about how the U.S. cannot fight conventional wars against any of these countries, but they will fight all kinds of other ways in all kinds of other ways to make this happen. And that does not dismiss or not. It always includes the nuclear option. So these countries need to cooperate militarily, and that's why I've seen cooperation around things like color revolutions and increasing defense of national sovereignty. And that way is critically important. And Iran now has a huge task ahead of it to do just that. But this interview, just to summarize, this interview was more so about Iran speaking to Americans who watch Tucker Carlson. So the emphasis was trying to break that bond that may still exist in some way, shape, or form for viewers of his show with Israel, to show that Israel is really a spark plug of war against Iran, that regime change against Iran is not in the interest of American people. And in this way, the interview was successful. But where this interview was not necessarily successful on both sides, on Tucker Carlson's side and on the Iranian president's side, was, I believe, in demonstrating the actual situation that we are in. The truth is that the United States is not it's not sitting on the sidelines. It is one that is not capable under Trump or really anyone else of negotiating in good faith and fairly with Iran, because the overall objective is regime change. And this objective is not just some kind of pursuit, some kind of hobby that the U.S. foreign policy establishment is pursuing that it can just turn off and say, well, we'll do something else now. No, it is part of a project of full spectrum dominance that sees the biggest links, the strongest links of the multipolar world system. China with its planned socialist economy, Russia with its heavily centralized and state-directed economy and military. And then we can also say the same for China. And then Iran with its steadfast sovereignty, its commitment to indigenous development, and its capacity to develop itself in ways that both connect to the rest of the world, because Iran has done that. Look at what it's done with China in terms of oil trade for economic development. And then look at what it's done with its ballistic missile program. Look at how it's been able to remain on its feet despite crippling sanctions. All of these speak to big trouble, a big kind of danger for the United States in being able to achieve its objective in that region, which is instability, chaos, and division, which allows for, as we have seen over the centuries, partition and the capacity for the U.S. and its allies here, its military outpost of Israel, to achieve their objectives. The problem here is that now chaos, instability, the divisions that they are wreaking havoc upon the region are blowing back big time. And that's true across the world. So this is a key fact. This is something key to remember, is that Iran here achieved a major victory against both the U.S. and Israel, but that victory is just part one, or we could say, part whatever number in this long history of aggression against Iran. It's another step toward full victory for Iran and the multipolar world, but it has to be seen with extreme caution, given that the United States, until it is arrested in some way, until either internationally or domestically it is arrested by the power of people to develop a different alternative, a new alternative to the rule of rapacious capital and endless war. Until that happens, we're not going to see this regime change operation end. No, in fact, we are in for a regime change war for some time to come, and we need to stay attentive to this. So, in effect, Tucker Carlson has done a service by showing that it is critical to get the Iranian side of the story. But in many ways, this interview falls short of showing the reality and the truth of what is going on here. And that is why we had to react to it. And that is why it's important as we move into the next phase of this war to continue to ensure that people understand just what is at stake here. In many ways, what is at stake is not only development, not only the ability for people to live in harmony and prosperity and to end scourges of the world like poverty, like war, to end that kind of exploitation, but also human existence itself in many respects. So that was the interview. I just want to address one quick thing before I get to announcements. So, I've had some messages sent to me about, criticisms of my interviews, and I just want to address something here. Not always am I going to be in a mode of, a lot of times when I do interviews, I am bringing forth their perspective, and I don't always agree with that perspective. And sometimes I don't, and maybe I lapse and I don't challenge hard enough for some viewers' liking. However, it is important to note that not everyone I bring on here shares my perspective 150% on matters, and that and not in every case or respect is it helpful or will it bring quality forth of information to do so, to turn things into certain kinds of debates, etc. It is important to just know that that perspective is not necessarily shared, not only by me, but likely for a good portion of the audience. So that includes on questions like Palestine. People should know my position very, very, very clearly, that I am of the 100% belief that in support of Palestinian resistance and the belief that they will eventually win. We see the absolutely impressive recent attacks and recent strikes on Israeli so-called defense forces, occupation forces in places like Beit Hanun. So we see the Palestinian resistance is alive and well, striking back, even amid a disastrous genocide and a kind of urban guerrilla warfare landscape. So I'm 100% in support of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, to keep fighting. And I, of course, I am no doomer, and I do not black pill. That's not me. But some people have other perspectives, and it's important to note that. So there may be times, and I'm addressing actually Dimitri Lascaris, I think, made a video regarding my interview with Mark Sloboda, and I will hopefully get to that and be able to speak to him directly. But I've gotten several messages in the past of other guests and stuff about views that they may not share, and seeing it as a reflection on me. And I just want to say I'm running a program here that actually brings forth many different perspectives. And unfortunately, I don't believe that many people share my perspectives fully on most issues, right? I don't think I would find many people who share my perspectives on everything. So it truly is a balance, and that's what makes journalism important. It makes getting voices from all over important, and to be able to bring forth your perspective while also giving way and air to others. With that said, overall, my view is that the resistance is going to keep going. There's going to continue to be a long struggle ahead. There are setbacks that have already been put into motion. There are also gains that are also occurring. The 12-day war was in many ways a gain for Iran and the resistance. But of course, there have been setbacks. What happened to Hezbollah? The ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, or whatever we want to call that thing, that was a setback in many ways. But of course, the right to resist is enshrined in the Geneva Conventions. It's enshrined in international law. And this channel has always, elevated that, as at least me on a personal level. I've always elevated that as just absolutely critical. And, this channel does its best to balance an entire, and it's just a large breadth of analysis on some of the biggest developments worldwide, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's West Asia, Iran, and the rest of the resistance. So overall, that is the perspective that I try to bring forth here. It's not always going to be perfect. It's not always going to be pretty, but I appreciate all of you sticking with me in this journey. With that said, everybody, I am going to now thank those who gave super stickers and super chats. Thanks, Juliet, for that. I hope you are well and staying cool. Dilshan Mendes, thank you so much, from Sri Lanka. Appreciate that. We have a question here. Can BRICS help Palestine? In many ways, many people don't agree with me here, but I believe BRICS is already helping Palestine in the sense that it is building the mechanisms and blocks that once the resistance is successful and wins, that there will be an economic architecture that can assist Palestine from the transition of being an oppressed nation without not only statehood, I hate even that technical term, but without self-determination. Once that self-determination is achieved, now there's an economic architecture that it can plug itself into in order to rapidly develop, which didn't exist during the Cold War. It didn't exist during that period. So I believe it already is. Now, of course, some might say that's a skirting from the actual question. How about helping Palestine directly now? Well, I will say on the one hand, I am not in agreement with the overall perspective of the multipolar world to be diplomatic about this situation, because I live in the belly of the beast. I am 100% opposed to Israel's genocide. I want not only it to end, but I want the full breadth of accountability to be brought down upon Israel and the United States, for that matter, on this issue. But I understand that we are just not in that world situation now where that can really occur, that any kind of massive move made against Israel will bring about an even a bigger reaction from the U.S. empire upon whoever it is, Russia, China, etc. Now, can Russia and China and BRICS do more economically to send a message to Israel, for example? Yeah, they possibly could. Are there calculations that I can't necessarily understand or know that Russia, China, and also the multipolar might know better than me about what the reaction could be, what the consequences could be of being more direct about Palestine? Yeah, probably so. So that's why I try to take it as a kind of balancing act, that it's not really about how I feel. It's really about what the actual conditions on the ground are. And militarily, Russia and China and most of the multipolar world outside of Iran can do very little for Palestine. Diplomatically and economically, perhaps more so. I believe Russia and China have done a lot diplomatically, but BRICS certainly could do more. Even the statement about condemning the genocide, yeah, it's probably not enough. But at the same time, is Russia and China, are they strong enough yet as a concerted bloc? I believe Russia and China can hold their own, which is why maybe they individually could do a little bit more. But is BRICS as a bloc strong enough yet to politically do anything in this realm? Probably not, because there's a lot of, I mean, look at India, look at some of these governments, that they're not all going to find consensus on taking concerted action against Israel. We just have to be quite honest about that. And that's where this struggle is going to have to continue to work. But then we have James. Thank you so much for your super chat and support. All right, everybody. So that is it for this live stream here. I want to now point you to the like button. Hit that like button before you go. That will help continue boosting the stream and YouTube's algorithm as this shifts into video mode, because I don't privatize. I don't make private my live streams. And then what you want to do, everybody, is you want to go to the video description. You can find not only where our guests' work is, from Sean Foo's YouTube channel, from Anastasia's YouTube channel, to Warwick Powell's Substack, but you can also find all the ways to support this channel here, because this channel is continuing to grow. We are continuing here. I'm my own producer. I do much of the work on my own outside of thumbnails. And so support this labor and work, because it is a lot of labor and work. Substack, Patreon. Patreon's the best way, but Substack, Buy Me a Coffee, PayPal, you can find all those in the video description. That helps keep this all going. Lastly, the announcement I have to make is tomorrow I have another mega panel. I'm loving these mega panels. I hope you are too. Tomorrow I have Brian Berletic, good friend of the show, as you know. I have KJ No, another good friend of this show, and Carl Zha. So be sure to be there tomorrow evening. That is Wednesday, July 9th, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Pretty late for the Europeans. So Central Standard Time, London time, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. area. Sorry about that. But 6 p.m. Pacific, July 9th, Brian Berletic, Carl Zha, and KJ No. All right. So everybody, 谢谢. Thank you. 再见. Thank you so much. Goodbye. And until next time, I will see you. I will see you again soon. So tomorrow, make sure you save the date. Bye-bye.